Dr. David Rodriguez had always been drawn to places where no human had ever set foot. After 15 years of studying strange life forms in laboratories, he wanted something real, something that would make people remember his name in the science world. The Amazon rainforest seemed like the perfect place to find it. The helicopter dropped him off at a small clearing 3 days ago. Now, as he walked deeper into the green maze of trees and vines, David could barely hear the sound of his own footsteps on the soft jungle floor. Everything here was alive. Insects buzzed around his head, colorful birds called from high branches, and somewhere in the distance, a monkey screamed its warning to others. David wiped sweat from his forehead and checked his GPS device. The screen flickered and showed nothing but static. He tapped it twice, but it stayed blank. This was the third piece of equipment that had stopped working since yesterday. First his satellite phone, then his metal detector, and now this. "Great," he muttered, stuffing the useless device back into his backpack. "Just great." But David wasn't worried yet. He had been a soldier before becoming a scientist, and the jungle didn't scare him. He knew how to survive here. His real concern was the mission. The government satellite had picked up strange energy readings from this exact area. Something was giving off signals that didn't match anything scientists had seen before. As the sun began to set, David found a good spot to make camp near a small stream. The water was clear and cold, perfect for drinking after he added his purification tablets. He set up his small tent between two large trees and started a small fire using dry wood he had collected. The jungle was never quiet, but as darkness fell, David noticed the sounds were changing. The normal bird calls and insect noises seemed to fade away. Instead, there were new sounds. Strange sounds that made the hair on his arms stand up. David sat by his fire, eating a simple dinner of canned beans and crackers. The flames danced in front of him, casting long shadows on the trees around his camp. Every few minutes, he heard something that sounded like metal hitting metal, but that was impossible. There were no machines out here, no other people for miles. Around midnight, his equipment started acting even stranger. The digital thermometer showed temperatures that jumped from hot to cold every few seconds. His flashlight flickered on and off by itself. Even his watch seemed confused, showing different times each time he looked at it. David pulled out his notebook and wrote down everything that was happening. Good scientists always kept records, even when things got weird. Especially when things got weird. The next morning brought new mysteries. As David packed up his camp, he noticed something odd about the trees around him. Some of them had what looked like crystals growing right out of their bark. These weren't normal crystals like the ones he had studied in college. These ones glowed with a soft blue light, even in the bright morning sun. David carefully broke off a small piece and examined it with his magnifying glass. The crystal felt warm to the touch and seemed to pulse like a slow heartbeat. When he held it close to his broken GPS device, the screen flickered back to life for just a moment before going dark again. "What are you?" David whispered to the crystal. He spent the whole morning collecting samples and taking photos. The crystals were everywhere once he knew what to look for. They grew in perfect geometric patterns, as if someone had planted them there on purpose. But who? And why? By afternoon, David had filled 3 sample containers with crystal fragments. His notebook was full of sketches and measurements. He was starting to think he had found something bigger than just a new mineral. This could be the discovery that changed everything. As he walked deeper into the jungle, following what looked like an old animal path, David started noticing other strange things. The plants here grew in unusual patterns, vines twisted in perfect spirals around tree trunks. Flowers bloomed in colors that hurt to look at directly. Even the air felt different, thick and charged like the moment before lightning strikes. David's military training had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now those instincts were telling him to be careful. Something was watching him. He could feel eyes on him as he walked, but every time he turned around, he saw nothing but empty jungle. The path led him to a clearing where the grass grew in perfect circles. At the center of each circle stood a tree unlike any he had ever seen. These trees had silver bark that reflected light like mirrors, and their leaves moved even though there was no wind. David set up his second camp in this clearing, far enough from the strange trees to feel safe, but close enough to study them. As night fell again, the trees began to glow with the same blue light as the crystals. The sight was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. He sat by his fire, writing in his notebook and trying to make sense of what he was seeing. According to everything he knew about science, none of this should be possible. Plants didn't glow without some kind of chemical reaction. Crystals didn't grow on trees, and equipment didn't break down for no reason. But here he was, surrounded by the impossible. As David finally settled into his sleeping bag, he thought about the local guides who had refused to come with him. They had spoken in whispers about this part of the jungle, calling it the place where sky spirits lived. At the time, David had dismissed their fears as superstition. Now he wasn't so sure. The jungle around him pulsed with strange energy, and David knew that tomorrow would bring even more questions. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep, not knowing that his life was about to change in ways he could never imagine. David woke up to the sound of his own heart beating fast. Something had pulled him from sleep, but he couldn't remember what. The jungle around him was darker than usual, as if even the glowing trees had dimmed their light. He checked his watch. 3:47 a.m. Then he heard it, a sound that made his blood run cold. It started low, like wind moving through caves, but then rose higher and higher until it became something else entirely. A cry, a scream, but not from any animal David had ever heard. This sound was different. It carried emotion, fear, pain, and something that sounded almost like words. Like someone trying to call for help in a language he didn't understand. David sat up in his sleeping bag, every muscle in his body tense. His military training kicked in automatically. Listen, locate, evaluate. The sound was coming from somewhere, deeper in the jungle, maybe half a mile away. The screaming came again, longer this time. David felt goosebumps rise on his arms. Whatever was making that noise was in serious trouble. And despite every instinct telling him to stay in his tent, David knew he had to help. He grabbed his flashlight, knife, and first aid kit. As a soldier, he had learned never to ignore cries for help. As a scientist, he was curious about what could make such an unusual sound. Both parts of him agreed. He had to investigate. David left his tent and followed the sound deeper into the jungle. The path was harder to see in the darkness, and twisted vines grabbed at his clothes as he pushed through the thick plants. His flashlight beam danced across strange flowers that seemed to close when the light hit them. The screaming guided him forward, getting louder and more desperate with each step. David tried to move quietly, but his boots cracked twigs and rustled. Leaves no matter how careful he was. If something dangerous was out there, it would hear him coming. After 20 minutes of difficult walking, David saw light ahead, but not the warm yellow glow of fire or the blue shimmer of the crystal trees. This light was white and harsh, like the fluorescent bulbs in his old laboratory. David turned off his flashlight and crept closer. Through the trees, he could see a clearing that looked completely different from the rest of the jungle. The grass was shorter and grew in perfect patterns. Strange metal objects stuck up from the ground like abstract sculptures, and in the center of it all was something that made David question his own sanity. It looked like a cage, but not made from any material he recognized. The bars seemed to be alive, moving and shifting like liquid metal that had somehow kept its shape. Inside the cage, something was trapped. David's first thought was that it was a person. The shape was human-like. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head. But as he got closer, hiding behind a large tree at the edge of the clearing, He could see that this was no ordinary person. The figure was tall and thin, much thinner than any human could be. Its skin seemed to glow with a pale light, and strange. Patterns moved across its surface like slow lightning. When it moved, David could see that its arms and legs were longer than they should be, and its fingers ended in what looked like small points of light. The creature, for David couldn't think of it as anything else, was clearly in pain. The cage was doing something to it, draining away its glow and making it weaker. Every few minutes, it would cry out again, and David realized this was the source of the screaming he had heard. David's scientific mind raced. This couldn't be real. People didn't glow. Cages weren't made of living metal. Things like this didn't exist on Earth. But his eyes couldn't lie about what he was seeing. The creature looked up suddenly, as if it had sensed David watching. Their eyes met across the clearing, and David felt something impossible happen. For just a moment, he could feel what the creature was feeling. Terror, pain, and underneath it all, a desperate hope that someone, anyone, might help. David stepped out from behind the tree before he could stop himself. The creature's eyes widened, eyes that were larger than human eyes and filled with intelligence. It tried to speak, but the sounds that came out were nothing like human words. Still, David understood. "Help me," those sounds seemed to say. "Please." David approached the cage slowly, his hands raised to show he meant no harm. The creature watched him carefully, its glowing patterns shifting to brighter colors. Up close, David could see that it was definitely female, though unlike any woman he had ever seen. The cage was even stranger than it had looked from a distance. The metal bars pulsed like a heartbeat, and David could feel energy coming from them. Bad energy that made his teeth ache and his skin crawl. He walked around the cage looking for a door or lock or some way to open it. The creature followed his movement with her eyes, occasionally making soft sounds that might have been encouragement. "I'm going to help you," David said, even though he wasn't sure she could understand English. "Just give me a minute to figure this out." The creature tilted her head at the sound of his voice. Then she raised one long, glowing finger and pointed at something behind David. He turned around and felt his heart stop. Standing at the edge of the clearing were 3 figures. They looked similar to the trapped creature, but different, darker. Their glow was red instead of white, and the patterns on their skin moved faster like angry storms. One of them was holding something that looked like a weapon. David's hand moved to the knife on his belt, but he knew it would be useless against these beings. Whatever they were, wherever they had come from, they were far beyond anything his military training had prepared him for. The trapped creature made a sound of pure terror. The red glowing figures began moving toward David and the cage. David had to make a choice. Run and save himself, or stay and try to help the trapped being. He looked into her glowing eyes one more time and saw something that made his decision easy. He saw trust. David's mind went blank for a second. 3 alien beings with red glowing skin were walking toward him, and one of them carried what looked like a weapon. His army training screamed at him to run, but something stronger kept his feet planted on the ground. The trapped creature behind him made a soft sound, almost like a whisper. When David glanced back, he saw her pointing at a small device attached to the side of the cage. It was blinking with the same red light as the approaching aliens. David understood immediately. It was some kind of signal. The cage had been calling them. "A trap," he whispered to himself. "This whole thing is a trap." The red glowing aliens were now close enough that David could see their faces clearly. They looked similar to the trapped female, but their expressions were cold and cruel. Their eyes were smaller and darker, and their movements were quick and sharp like predators. The one in front raised its weapon, a long, curved device that hummed with energy. David had seen enough alien movies to know that getting hit by that thing would probably be the end of him. But instead of running, David did something that surprised even himself. He stepped in front of the cage, putting himself between the trapped creature and her captors. "Stay back!" he shouted, pulling out his knife. He knew how ridiculous he must look, a human with a small blade facing beings from another world. But sometimes courage isn't about having the right weapons. Sometimes it's about doing what's right, even when you're scared. The lead alien stopped walking and tilted its head, studying David like he was an interesting insect. It made a series of clicking sounds to its companions, who spread out to surround the cage. David's heart was beating so fast he thought it might explode. Sweat ran down his face despite the cool jungle air, but he held his ground. The trapped creature made another sound, softer this time. David felt something strange happen in his mind, like a gentle touch inside his thoughts. Suddenly he could sense what she was trying to tell him, the red control panel on the left side of the cage. "Touch it twice, then pull down." David blinked in surprise. The voice hadn't come through his ears. It was inside his head, speaking in English but with an accent he couldn't place. "Don't be afraid," the voice continued. "I won't hurt you. My name is... The closest word in your language would be Luna." "Luna," David repeated quietly, never taking his eyes off the red glowing aliens. "Yes. And those are the hunters. They've been chasing my people across the galaxy for many years." David wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but the hunters were getting closer. The leader was now only 10 feet away, its weapon pointed directly at David's chest. "The control panel," Luna urged. "Quickly before they stop you." David dove to his left, rolling across the ground toward the side of the cage. The hunter's weapon fired, sending a bolt of red energy that burned the grass where David had been standing just a moment before. David's fingers found the control panel Luna had described. It was warm to the touch and covered with symbols he didn't recognize. He pressed it twice, just as Luna had instructed, then pulled down on a small lever beneath it. The cage made a sound like breaking glass, and suddenly, the living metal bars began to dissolve. Luna stumbled forward, free but weak from whatever the cage had been doing to her. The hunters let out angry roars, and all three began running toward them. David grabbed Luna's arm, her skin felt warm and slightly electric, and helped her to her feet. "Can you run?" he asked. "Not far," Luna replied in his mind. "The cage drained too much of my energy, but I know a place we can hide." David looked around desperately. The hunters were almost on them, and Luna could barely stand. The jungle around the clearing looked thick and dark, full of places to hide, but also full of dangers. "Trust me," Luna said, placing her glowing hand on David's arm. "Follow my lead." Instead of running into the jungle, Luna stumbled toward one of the strange metal objects David had noticed earlier. Up close, he could see it wasn't a sculpture at all. It was some kind of machine, covered in the same symbols as the cage's control panel. Luna pressed her palm against the machine's surface, and it began to glow with white light. The air around them started to shimmer like heat waves rising from hot pavement. The first hunter reached them just as the machine activated. It swung its weapon at David's head, but the blow passed right through him as if he were made of air. "Camouflage field," Luna explained as she worked at the machine's controls. "We're still here, but they can't see us or touch us." David watched in amazement as the three hunters ran right past them, chasing shadows into the jungle. Their red glow disappeared between the trees, and soon even their angry roars faded into the distance. "That was incredible," David said out loud, then remembered that Luna could hear his thoughts. "You saved my life," Luna replied, her mental voice filled with gratitude. "Why? You don't even know me." David thought about that for a moment. Why had he risked his life for a complete stranger from another world? "Because you asked for help," he said simply, "and because leaving someone trapped and in pain isn't something I could live with." Luna turned to look at him, and David saw something in her large, bright eyes that he recognized. Respect, trust, and maybe the beginning of friendship. "My people need to know about this," Luna said. "The hunters have found us again. We thought we were safe here, but nowhere is safe from them." "Your people?" David asked. "There are more of you?" "Oh, yes," Luna replied, and despite everything they had just been through, David thought he detected a smile in her mental voice. "Many more. And after what you just did, I think they're going to want to meet you." The camouflage field around them began to fade as Luna's energy ran low. David helped support her weight as she leaned against him. "Where are they?" David asked. Luna pointed, deeper into the jungle, toward a part that looked darker and more mysterious than anywhere David had explored. "Home," she said simply. "But David, once you see our home, once you meet my people, your life will never be the same. Are you ready for that?" David looked back toward his abandoned campsite, then toward the jungle where the hunters had disappeared. He thought about his old life, the laboratory, the failed experiments, the colleagues who didn't respect his work. Then he looked at Luna, this incredible being from another world who had trusted him enough to save her life. "I'm ready," he said. David helped Luna walk deeper into the jungle, her arm around his shoulder for support. Every few steps she had to stop and rest. The cage had drained more of her energy than she wanted to admit. "How much farther?" David asked, looking around, nervously. The jungle felt different here. The trees were taller, their branches forming a thick roof that blocked out most of the sunlight. Strange flowers glowed softly in the shadows, and the air hummed with an energy that made David's skin tingle. "Not far now," Luna replied in his mind. "But David, before we arrive, there are things you need to know. My people, we've been hiding on your planet for a very long time." David stopped walking. "How long?" 50 of your years. Maybe more." Luna's mental voice was sad. "We came here as refugees running from the hunters. Earth seemed like a safe place to hide. 50 years? David couldn't believe it. "But nobody knows about you." "How is that possible?" Luna managed a weak smile. "We're very good at staying hidden." "And your people?" "They see what they expect to see. A strange light in the sky becomes a weather phenomenon. Unusual sounds in the forest become unknown animals. We've learned to live in the spaces between your explanations." As they walked, David noticed more signs of alien presence. Trees grew in perfect geometric patterns. Vines twisted around branches in ways that looked almost like writing. The very ground beneath their feet felt softer, more alive than normal jungle floor. "Your local people know," Luna continued. "The ones you call indigenous. They've always known. They help us sometimes, bring us information about the outside world. That's how we learned your language." David thought about the guides who had refused to enter this part of the jungle. Their talk of sky spirits suddenly made perfect sense. After another 10 minutes of walking, Luna stopped beside what looked like an ordinary tree. But when she placed her glowing hand against its bark, the tree shimmered and became transparent. "Hologram," David whispered in amazement. "Something like that," Luna agreed. "Come. It's time you met the others." They stepped through the fake tree, and David found himself in a world that took his breath away. The hidden settlement stretched out before him like something from a dream. Buildings grew directly from the living trees, their walls made of the same glowing crystal David had found earlier. Bridges of light connected the structures, and beings like Luna walked along paths that seemed to float in midair. But what struck David most was how peaceful it all felt. Children played in gardens filled with impossible flowers. Adults worked, together on projects David couldn't understand but could see were beautiful. Everyone moved with a grace and calmness that made David feel like he had stepped into a different kind of world entirely. "Welcome to Haven," Luna said. our home for the past 50 years. As they entered the settlement, David realized that not everyone looked exactly like Luna. Some were taller, some shorter. Their skin showed different patterns of light, and their eyes were various shades of blue and silver. But all of them had the same gentle, intelligent expression, and all of them stopped what they were doing to stare at David. "Don't worry," Luna said, sensing his nervousness. "They're just curious. It's been a long time since any of us spoke to a human face-to-face." An older being approached them, his skin showing slower, deeper patterns of light. His eyes were kind but serious, and David could sense wisdom in the way he moved. "This is Elder Cosmos," Luna explained. "He leads our community." Elder. Cosmos looked at David for a long moment, then spoke directly into his mind. His mental voice was deeper than Luna's, with an accent that sounded like wind through mountains. "So you are the human who saved our Luna from the hunters," Cosmos said. "We felt the disturbance from here. We were preparing a rescue mission when Luna's signal returned to normal. I couldn't just leave her there," David said out loud, then felt embarrassed. He still wasn't used to this telepathic communication. "You risked your life for someone you had never met, from a species you didn't know existed," Cosmos continued. "This tells us much about your character." Luna led David to a circular area in the center of the settlement where many of the beings had gathered. David felt like he was in some kind of outdoor amphitheater, but one made of living trees and glowing crystals instead of stone. "Tell him about the war," Luna said to Cosmos. "He needs to understand what's really happening here." Cosmos nodded and gestured for David to sit on what looked like a mushroom, but felt as comfortable as any chair he had ever used. "The hunters have been chasing us across the galaxy for over 200 years, Cosmos began. "They are not evil in the way your people understand evil. They simply believe that the universe belongs to them alone." David listened as Cosmos explained how Luna's people, who called themselves the Lumari, had once lived on a beautiful planet near the center of the galaxy. The hunters had come without warning, demanding that the Lumari leave their world. "We tried to negotiate," Cosmos continued. "We offered to share our planet, our resources, our knowledge. But the hunters only understand conquest. They destroyed our cities, scattered our people. Those of us who escaped have been running ever since." "But why Earth?" David asked. "Out of all the planets in the galaxy, why did you come here?" "Because your world is young and full of life," Luna answered. "And because your people were not yet ready to travel between stars. We thought we could hide here until the hunters moved on to other hunting grounds." Cosmos's light pattern shifted to darker colors. "But the hunters are patient. They followed us here 3 years ago. Since then, we've been fighting a secret war above your heads and in your forests." David felt a chill run down his spine. "A war? Here on Earth?" "Small battles," Cosmos explained. "Scout ships, hunting parties. We've managed to keep them from discovering your major cities, but it's becoming harder. Our camouflage technology is failing. Our energy reserves are running low." David looked around at the peaceful settlement, trying to imagine these gentle beings at war. It seemed impossible. "We are not warriors by nature," Cosmos said, apparently reading David's thoughts. "We are scientists, artists, teachers. But when someone threatens our children, we learn to fight." Luna's light patterns flickered with exhaustion, and several of the other Lumari moved to help her to a resting area. David watched them care for her with such tenderness that he felt a lump form in his throat. "The cage that trapped Luna was new hunter technology," Cosmos continued. "It was designed to drain our life energy and transmit our location. If you hadn't freed her, the signal would have brought more hunters," David finished. "Many more, perhaps enough to overrun our defenses and discover your major population centers." David felt the weight of what Cosmos was telling him. Not only were there aliens living secretly on Earth, but they were fighting a war to protect humanity from an even more dangerous alien species. "Why are you telling me all this?" David asked. "Why trust me with such important secrets?" Cosmos smiled, his light patterns shifting to warmer colors. "Because, David Rodriguez, you have already proven that you will fight to protect the innocent, and because we need your help." David's heart skipped a beat. "My help? What could I possibly do that you can't?" "You can speak to your people," Luna said, her mental voice weak but determined. "You can prepare them, because the hunters are coming in greater numbers, and soon we won't be able to hide the war anymore." David sat in silence for several minutes, trying to process everything he had learned. The weight of the decision before him felt heavier than anything he had ever faced in his life. These peaceful beings were asking him to risk everything: his career, his reputation, maybe even his safety, to help them protect Earth. "I know it's a lot to ask," Cosmos said gently. "Take your time to think about it." David looked around at the Lumari settlement. Children played nearby, their laughter sounding like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Adults worked together on beautiful art projects and tended gardens full of impossible flowers. These weren't invaders or threats. They were refugees who had been quietly protecting his world for 50 years. "What exactly would you need me to do?" David asked. Luna, who had recovered some of her strength, moved closer. "We need someone the human authorities will believe, someone with scientific credentials who can explain what's happening without causing panic. The hunters are planning something big," Cosmos added, his light patterns shifting to urgent orange colors. "Our scouts have detected at least 20 of their ships gathering on the dark side of your moon. They're preparing for a full-scale invasion." David's blood ran cold. "An invasion? How long do we have?" "Perhaps 2 weeks. Maybe less." David ran his hands through his hair, his mind racing. "But who would believe me? If I go to the government and tell them aliens are about to invade Earth, they'll think I've lost my mind." "That's why we need proof," Luna said. She gestured toward a group of Lumari who were working on what looked like advanced technology. "We can give you recordings, energy readings, even small pieces of our technology. Things your scientists can study and verify." Cosmos stood and began walking toward another part of the settlement. David and Luna followed him to a building that looked like it was made entirely of crystal. Inside, David saw banks of equipment that hummed with energy and displayed information in languages he couldn't read. "This is our monitoring station," Cosmos explained. "For 50 years, we've been tracking every spacecraft that enters your solar system, every communication the hunters send, every move they make." A younger Lumari approached them, his light patterns flickering with excitement and fear. "Elder Cosmos, we're detecting new hunter activity. They're sending advanced scouts to 12 different locations around the planet." David watched as the monitoring equipment displayed a map of Earth with red dots appearing in various locations. He recognized some of them: major cities, military bases, important landmarks. "They're scouting targets," David said, understanding immediately. "Yes," Cosmos confirmed. "They're preparing to strike at the heart of human civilization." David made his decision. "I'll do it," he said firmly. "I'll help you. But we need to be smart about this. If we approach the wrong people or say the wrong things, we could make everything worse." Luna's light patterns brightened with relief. "What do you suggest?" David thought for a moment, drawing on his years of experience dealing with government, bureaucracy, and scientific institutions. "First, we need undeniable proof, something so clear that even the most skeptical scientist couldn't dismiss it. Then we approach specific people, ones I know personally who work in defense and space research." Over the next few hours, the Lumari worked with David to prepare a package of evidence. They gave him video recordings of hunter ships, energy readings that showed alien technology, and even a small crystal device that demonstrated their advanced capabilities. This communicator will let you contact us from anywhere on Earth, Luna explained, as she handed David a device that looked like a glowing stone. Just hold it and think about speaking to us. We'll hear you. As the sun began to set, David knew it was time to leave. He had to get back to civilization and begin the most important mission of his life. But as he prepared to go, alarms began sounding throughout the settlement. The Lumari's light patterns shifted to deep red as they rushed to their monitoring stations. "Hunter attack ships," the young technician reported urgently. "3 of them, approaching our location. They must have followed David's trail." Cosmos turned to David with a grave expression. "It seems we're out of time for subtlety. The war is about to become very visible." David could hear strange sounds coming from the jungle around the settlement, the hum of alien engines and the crack of energy weapons. The hunters had found haven. "We need to evacuate the children and—" "Elders," Luna said, her mental voice tight with controlled panic. "David, you need to leave now. Get that evidence to your people." "I'm not leaving you to fight alone," David said, surprising himself with his determination. "You must," Cosmos insisted. "If we all perish here tonight, who will warn your world about what's coming?" David knew they were right, but every fiber of his being rebelled against running away. These beings had become his friends in just a few short hours. The thought of leaving them to face the hunters alone made him sick. The sounds of battle were getting closer. David could see flashes of light through the trees as energy weapons fired back and forth. Luna grabbed David's arm. "There's an escape tunnel that leads to the river. From there, you can reach your equipment and contact your people." As explosions rocked the settlement, David made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He ran. Behind him, he could hear the sounds of the battle intensifying. The peaceful settlement where he had spent the most amazing hours of his life was under attack, and he was running away like a coward. But as he reached the tunnel entrance, Luna's voice echoed in his mind one last time. "You're not running away, David. You're running toward hope. Tell your people what you've seen. Help them prepare. Save both our worlds." 3 days later, David stood in a secure government facility, surrounded by officials who had barely believed his story until they saw the evidence. The crystal device Luna had given him was being analyzed by the world's top scientists who couldn't explain how it worked but couldn't deny that it was beyond any human technology. Dr. Rodriguez, the general in charge of the meeting, said, "If what you're telling us is true, we need to prepare for something unprecedented." David nodded, thinking about Luna and wondering if she had survived the attack on Haven. "General, what I'm telling you is that we're not alone in the universe. We haven't been alone for 50 years. And now we have a choice to make." The room fell silent as David continued. "We can work together with the Lumari to defend our planet, or we can face the hunters alone. But one way or another, the age of hiding is over. The world is about to change forever." As David spoke, he touched the crystal communicator hidden in his pocket. Somehow he could feel that Luna was still alive, still fighting, still hoping that humanity would choose to stand with them. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in his life, David knew exactly what he was fighting for.